Hello, and welcome to the final word. Today is Monday, October 19th, and my name is Chanson. I'm one of the pastors at Manchac United Methodist Church, and I have with me today Leslie Piggott. Hello, Leslie.
Hello.
Usually, Mondays is Pastor David and myself getting together to talk about the scripture and the sermon from the day before. But Pastor David is on vacation. And so I asked if Leslie would join me and so that together we can talk. I mean, Leslie has been the one that reliably sends reflections and questions each week, and we so appreciate it. And so, because you're always thinking about it, I was like, let's just invite Leslie on with me so I don't have to do it myself. So thank you. The Piggotts actually do a lot to serve the church behind the scenes for Sunday morning worship. I mean, they do other things more than just for Sunday. Like there are a lot of ways of serving, but for Sundays, Leslie, you create the slides for the 8:30 service that goes to the live stream, and Brad runs the live stream. And the whole family arrives at like 7 a.m. every week. We've been doing it since September 1st. So we're really grateful for the Piggotts for being there. We've got a few people who are joining us. We got Ron Hawkins and Edna. Thank you so much for being with us live. Hello to y'all too. Anyone else who's here, feel free to say hi in the chat box. All right, so what I'm going to do is kind of go through the sermon that kind of outline it that David shared yesterday and make some questions and stops along the way. So yesterday's message was the final message in our Moses in 8 Objects sermon series. The last object was a mountain, so it's not exactly an object, but it's a physical thing. Mount Nebo, which is talked about in Deuteronomy 34. And so Moses in Deuteronomy 34 goes up Mount Nebo. He sees the land and he ends up dying up there. And it says, the scripture says that God buried Moses. And nobody knows where he was buried exactly. And David said that he's sometimes talked about as the patron saint of the missing. And you noted, Leslie, a contrast between Joseph and Moses. Tell me what you were thinking.
I just thought it was kind of interesting that, the Israelites made a point to carry Joseph's bones out of Egypt. He requested it, I think, back when he died, well, when he was dying or knew he was almost gone, I guess. And so they made a point to carry it out, like, to the promised land. And Joseph, he wasn't exactly a leader of the Israelite nation. He did kind of become a leader within the Egyptian world, but he was someone that he rescued the Hebrew people from the famine, but he wasn't someone, I don't know, that you would call necessarily like a spiritual leader or something like that. But Moses obviously was. And Moses, you don't even know where he's buried, let alone have the ability to carry his bones out into the promised land. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that they were devoted to carrying Joseph's bones out, and then Moses, they don't even get to know where he is. And it could just be, I guess, maybe God didn't want them to be like, this is a holy site and we're going to sacrifice here and we're going to this and this and make it something that it wasn't, But
your guess about that is very likely. Actually, during our scripture study session that I had with Pastor David a few weeks ago, he mentioned that very reason, that it's might be that God didn't want the people to continue to make pilgrimages back to that particular place. I even read online that it was to potentially prevent idolatry, like worship of Moses. So that might be part of the reason that we don't know where, versus Joseph's bones were very particularly pulled out. But Moses, he missed out on the promised land. And I hate missing out on things. Pastor David didn't reference this probably because he's not as young as myself, but I think of FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Right. I was thinking that too.
Um, and so it seems like a negative thing when you first read it. Oh, he didn't make it into the promised land. And so David in the sermon is like, what are we to make of the fact that Moses missed out on it and his body is still missing? And David made a wonderful connection to our lives today, that we are living in a time of missing out because of the pandemic. And so, Leslie, what's one thing that you have missed out on during the pandemic?
I think that the thing that I'm most disappointed to have missed out on is traveling to see my two grandmas. So one lives in Colorado and she's 94, and the other one is in Oklahoma City area, and she'll be 89 in February. So we usually go see them in the summer for a few days every summer, and we didn't get to do that this year. So when you emailed me that you were going to ask me that, I told Brad that my first thought was that I miss getting to run marathons, but he's like, don't say that. Like, well, then it's true.
Legitimate. Yeah, but your reference to your grandparents, in my mind, the thing that I feel like I've missed out on goes to the opposite age spectrum. I think about my baby Micah and just missing out on getting to introduce him to everybody and just the interactions. Like, I would have loved for people to like hold him, and I'm just like, what? He's not getting exposure to people like my other kids did. Is he gonna be okay? And he just this weekend met one of his grandfathers for the first time, and he's almost 7 months old. So that's something I think about. But David said that with Moses, he was not actually missing out on as much as we might think when we read this story. And so David pointed out three things about Moses. Moses got to live a long, full life. He was 120 years old. He was still vibrant. Like, he wasn't all wrinkled and struggling with age. He had been intimate with God. He had seen miracles. So he lived a long, full life. 2, Moses did his job. He prepared the people to enter the promised land. And so he succeeded. And number 3 is that God, in Deuteronomy 34, gave Moses a vision from Mount Nebo. And Pastor David kind of mentioned how it's like he was surveying the land, like claiming the land, making legal claim to the land, and the whole like no need to be present to win. Like Moses was a part of that win in the work of God there. But I loved all those 3 points. So it made me feel not so bad for Moses anymore. And I was thinking how much of a contrast Moses is to King Hezekiah. So King Hezekiah, we read about him a few different places, but I'm looking over here, 2 Kings, chapter 20. Hezekiah is actually the king that we talked about in the book of Micah this summer, but he has a full story. And so he was in Judah, the king of Judah, and he heard from Isaiah that he was going to die, and so he needed to get his affairs in order, and he cried out to God and was like, please don't let me die. And God went back to Isaiah and said, okay, well, tell him that he can have some more years, and he gets some more years. During that time, he shows the Babylonians, like, he just welcomes the Babylonians in and shows them all of the land and the palaces, which was a bad idea for a lot of reasons I'm not going to get into. And so Isaiah comes back to Hezekiah and says, why did you do that? And eventually these Babylonians are going to come in and take everything. And they're going to take off your people and everything that you've stored up. And this is what Hezekiah says. The word of the Lord you have spoken is good. For he thought, will there not be peace and security in my lifetime? And so it's like, he's like, oh, it's going to be terrible, but it's not going to be terrible for me. It's going to be like for my descendants. And so I'm just like, that is such a contrast with Moses, who did everything he could. And though he didn't experience it, the benefits of the promised land, he made it so that the people behind him could. And what an example that is for us as we either do or do not try to make the world and our community better for future generations. So I wanted to share that. So blabbering on about Moses wins over Hezekiah.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the big things that David said in his message is that the promise was not the land, but in the presence of God. And if they depended on a land to be a people, then they would not be a people, because they were constantly exiled and they didn't really get their land in perpetuity. So, but yet they're still a people, and it's because it's the presence of God. And that is like, I key in onto the fact that the church, we depend on a person, the presence of Jesus and God, the Spirit. We don't depend on the church building. It's a good reminder. What, Leslie, is one of the challenges and interesting things that you heard in the sermon?
One thing that I think is a challenge, I think maybe not just for me, maybe everyone, is to celebrate God's presence in the moment rather than lamenting that you aren't having the experience that you were hoping to have. And like you said, we've all been called upon to exercise our patience during this pandemic. And we haven't been abandoned, even though we can't be together, like, face to face. So I think one way that you can sort of make a conscious effort to think about how you aren't abandoned and how the presence of God is with you is, I haven't actually done this. We've done it at the church as a church family. Like, Kim got a big pumpkin from the pumpkin patch. So people do gratitude pumpkins, which I should have brought my little pumpkin up here so I could have a visual, but pretend. So you have your pumpkin and you just start at the top and radially out, write, like, today I'm thankful for, and each day you write something, and you can put, a heart or something in between so they don't all run together as meaninglessness. And, or other people will do like a gratitude list during the month of November. You've probably seen that on Facebook, where they, day 1, I'm thankful for, day 2, I'm thankful for. And I think anytime you make a conscious effort to put to word how God is present in your life, or recognize God's presence in your life, it makes you feel less isolated and, kind of how we all feel right now. So
I think that's really, really good thought. And, actually starting next week, we are starting a gratitude sermon series. So for the next several weeks, perhaps we should recommend maybe gratitude pumpkin is the thing. I love that idea. I've never heard of gratitude pumpkins before, so thanks for talking about that. Well, Moses died, and Pastor David talked about how Moses, in his lifetime, missed out physically, but not spiritually. Like, he was connected intimately with God all that time. God was there, and it's the presence of God that makes us a people. It's, yeah. And the final point or story that Pastor David made was that the people didn't look for Moses. Like, they just kept moving on. They grieved and they moved on because God wasn't done. There were great days ahead. And he finished with a story of a circus parade. How in this illustration, a little boy was so excited to go see a parade, and this was years ago when the circus he wanted to see the circus, and the circus people and animals would parade through town on their way to the circus tent. And so the boy gets the money from his dad and runs and watches the parade, and then hands the money to the clown and goes home, because he doesn't know that the circus was coming. It was not the parade was just a small part of it, the beginning of it. And so, what do you have any final thoughts about the story of the circus parade?
Yeah, that story when he was telling it and he says he got to the point of, and then he gave one of the clowns his money. I was like, oh, your heart just breaks for the little guy. Like, and and the clown doesn't say like, oh no, like this is free. You just got caught as a sucker, I guess. But I think that I guess one of the last things I heard from his sermon was to not let yourself miss the presence of God in your life. And he said, the best is yet to come. So while we can celebrate the moment, and the little things, we can't become complacent. And we can still look for big things that God's going to do. He's still working and still moving. Brad's mom's church in Utah had a slogan for a while. It was just a symbol. It was a semicolon, and it said underneath, God is still speaking. So don't put a period where you've heard don't put a period where he put a comma. So
yeah, it is an encouraging word to end on. So we'll end on that as well today. Thanks for everyone who's tuned in with us and is watching later. Thank you, Leslie, for paying good attention to every week's sermon. And I'm inspired by the way that you really reflect on it. It is easy for most people, including myself, to listen to a sermon and then by the next day I've totally forgotten about it. But one way to help is to journal about it, to make notes, to send comments to the pastors or friends, and we encourage anybody else to send us comments or questions so that we can discuss it together for the final word. All right. Well, Leslie, have a wonderful week.
you too.
See you out there. Bye.
Bye.